Hi, everybody. I'm Brent Stafford, and welcome to our special coverage of the Taxpayers Protection Alliance's Good Cop 2.0, the tobacco harm reduction counter conference to the World Health Organization's COP11. Joining us live from Geneva for day 4 at TPA's Good Cop 2.0 are David Williams, president at TPA, and Martin Cullip, TPA International Fellow. Gentlemen, I understand day 3 at Good Cop 2.0 was Asia Day. How did that go?
It was fantastic. I mean, and I'm glad we dedicated a whole day to Asia because there's so many different things happening in Asia, right? You have what's happening in New Zealand with smoking rates plummeting. And of course, the WHO gives them the Dirty Ashtray Award because smoking rates are plummeting. And then, Malaysia and the different countries in Asia, what's happening. So it shows you that different countries are taking different approaches. And we also mix this with science and talking about what THR is and how it helps people. And that's what I wish these countries would look at is instead of the political science of this, the empirical science of these products and what's been happening in innovation. And when I think of innovation, 25 years ago, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have iPhones, but we do now. And why not use the same sort of innovation in this space with tobacco harm reduction? And companies are, mom and pop vape shops are, so we need to embrace that sort of innovation. That's why yesterday, again, with Asia Day, talking about innovation and the science, it really all came together very neatly, at least for me, and I hope for everybody else.
And Martin, from your position, why does Asia deserve a whole day?
Well, when I spoke with Dr. Tiki earlier in the week, I said it often confuses me what's happening over there because you've got, for example, Thailand. One minute they were going to legalize vaping, next minute they've got a ban, and I get confused myself about what's happening in these countries. I have to talk to people like Nancy often, so what's happening in Malaysia or in Indonesia or those. So it is interesting, and they, those countries in Asia do things differently to European countries that I'm used to in America. And so it's interesting to see and it was a good day just hearing about all the different facets that are going on over there.
Well, and we definitely have 4 interviews lined up all about Asia. So we'll have that later in the show. Let's talk a little bit about the overall COP11 and what happened on day 3. So what's the mood there like?
Well, this is when they're getting down to the talking kind of thing, and not a lot comes out. You can glean certain bits of information here and there, but it seems to me there's immense frustration amongst the parties at Europe. We spoke about that yesterday. I think they're frustrated that Europe hasn't got a common position, especially on the forward-looking measures, which is Agenda Item 4.1 about their attempts to use Article 2.1 to get countries to go further than what's in the treaty. So I think they're very frustrated in that, and that you can tell from some of the things that are happening. So ASH USA, which is a Bloomberg funding organization, I have to mention it every time. They wrote an article yesterday saying that they need to come to consensus on this. And what I found interesting about that, they said they were really rude about other parties that wouldn't come to a consensus about it. They called them. They said they either didn't read the proposals or they didn't understand them. Yeah, that's the article there. And it's really quite rude. It's basically saying these countries who've said that they think the FLM's forward-looking measures are excessive and that they haven't been properly tested to see if they're actually helpful for public health. And they reckon that it's just the testing of the waters by the EU Commission to try and drive these policies in the EU. They've got legitimate concerns about this, but there's Ash USA basically saying, oh, they didn't read it or they didn't understand. But when you actually read what was in the documents for the WHO, they've not only said that, because they did say you can consider these things and they're potential things that you can do, but it also says that you have to report back to the WHF FCTC every year and tell them what ones you've actually done. So it's kind of placing an obligation on these countries to report and saying that these things are a list of things they should be doing rather than just having something that they can consider. So I think the European countries that have reservations to that, I think they're quite right to. But it's almost like they're being bullied and bounced into it by the WHO authorities and some of the parties.
And one thing Martin mentioned yesterday, or I think it was yesterday, is that you have 27 European countries and 9 of them are pushing back. I mean, yeah, if my math is correct, that's a third of the EU is pushing back on this. And what does that tell you, Brent? I mean, it tells you that there is no uniform agreement on any of this. And we've talked about this before, is Sweden. And when I was younger and I would want to learn from something, I would say, okay, who's done this before? Where can I look to, you know, do something better? But people aren't looking to Sweden. We are, obviously, as a community, a THR community, but you don't have other governments, you don't have other countries and delegations going, wait a second, what's happening in Sweden? What has happened in Japan with heat not burn? That's all I'm asking is during this conference is that they talk about the success stories. And they're so intent on giving these dirty ashtray awards and condemning people and trying to, grow the global bureaucracy. They're not saying, well, what countries has this worked in, and can we do the same thing? So that's my frustration.
Yeah, Martin and David, some of the wording that I've seen out there is that the NGOs sound entitled. Could that be the case?
Yeah, well, definitely. I'm going to reference an article written on clearing the air yesterday because they're good on European matters, and they've seemed to have accessed a document where Denmark is using aggressive and threatening language to try and push the EU to come to consensus on those forward-looking measures. Excuse me. And as I said, this would bind all the countries in the EU to these measures that some of them just don't want. And is mischievously clear in the air termed it as Denmark is going to war on Sweden kind of thing. So the report's quite funny. And just out of interest, I looked last night to see how many times they've actually gone to war. And there's the article, yeah. And Wikipedia actually has a list of times that Denmark and Sweden have gone to war, and they since 500 AD to 1814, they've gone to war 44 times. So,
And that doesn't include soccer matches.
yeah, there's obviously no love lost between these countries, it seems to me. And now Denmark is trying to get nicotine pouches and vapes banned, when obviously Sweden doesn't want that.
Well, clearing the air, obviously, they do some really good work there. There was also the Euro Reporter had a piece out too that was highlighting the division or diverse opinions, which I always thought diversity was supposed to be good in Europe.
Yeah, exactly. We mentioned that earlier, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what we've been told, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, diversity is good, but not, when you're a global bureaucracy, you don't want diversity because you want, your talking points. There's a game show and you're probably familiar with it, Jeopardy, right? Is that you're presented with the answer, and then you have to come up with the question. This is what's happening at the World Health Organization. This what's happened. What happens with a lot of research is that they say we know what we want the answer to be, so we're going to come up with the question. And I think we call it Jeopardy-based research, and that's not how you do it. You look at it completely differently. But the WHO and especially the anti-THR people are like, well, we want to show popcorn lung, we want to show EVALI, we want to show all these damages, so we're just going to backfill our research to show that it exists, and it doesn't. So again, our tax dollars are going to these global organizations coming up with phony science.
So the Global Alliance for Tobacco Control in their bulletin that they put out for day 3 highlighted the fact that there are some countries, so now not just Europe, but some countries that are like bellowing out that some of the forward-looking measures and so forth are an assault on their sovereignty. And that, of course, is very bad news at WHO.
Yeah, I saw that as well. Some of the language. I'll just have to point out, because I think we should do this every day. The authors of all the articles in the bulletin this morning were the Global Alliance on Tobacco Control, Bath University, the Global Centre for Good Governance and Tobacco Control, European Network for Smoking Tobacco Prevention, Smoke Free Partnership, ASH USA, and all of them are Bloomberg funded. I just thought that we get that one in there.
I mean, well, I think that's important.
Yeah, but yeah, they had an article, didn't they, where they were saying it was veiled attack on the EU nations that don't want the forward-looking measures. So that's where you get the idea that they're a bit frustrated about this. And they said, yeah, to call a filter ban extreme is like calling a ban on leaded petrol as radical. And the reason they use extreme is because that was what Italy said. They said these measures are extreme. They're not been tested to be good for public health. But this article was having, it didn't say in so many words, but you could tell this was having a go at the European countries that aren't coming to consensus. So there's a lot of pushing of these countries and a lot of pressure on them to try and conform. But it doesn't look like they're budging, and nor should they.
No, true. And I think it was in the Euro Reporter piece, but they referred to the division on this issue as a doomed struggle to reach a common position.
Yeah, that seems to be the case, and I don't see how they can. They can't get the EU to commit to this because there are 9 countries who said we don't want to commit to this. If the EU does commit to it, as we said yesterday, that would mean the treaty is invalid under EU law, so they wouldn't be able to apply it because they'd have all the arguments back in the EU. So it seems to me that they're just stuck. And I don't think that the FCTC knows what to do. But it seems that the one thing that Ash USA said, they posted an article yesterday, and this I think is quite staggering actually. They said that they really want to come to consensus on this, but they said sometimes happens, people get tired. They said we're going to be debating till 11 o'clock or maybe even later. And we're hoping that we get a consensus because sometimes people come to consensus just because they're tired. And they said, yeah, hopefully fatigue will set in, and then we'll get consensus because we're the stronger people. And I mean, I just thought, is that really the way you want to do policy? You want to wait until the other side gets too tired and just does something anyway? I mean, that's a global organization, and this is Ash USA saying that's a preferable result. I think that's a terrible result. You shouldn't bind anyone, when you've got talking about a global thing, and 8 billion people in the world or whatever it is. You can't pass policy based on if someone's tired or not. That's
Well,
terrible.
no. Yeah. And I mean, consensus is supposed to be what they should be striving for. And if there isn't consensus, then, the people pushing the position that's not being accepted, they should maybe rethink their position. Or instead, maybe they just need to crack a few heads.
Yeah.
Yeah, go back to the drawing board, right? Because you see that Gambia, Mozambique, Serbia, obviously St. Kitts and Nevis, more delegations are speaking out. There's got to be some sort of recognition. And listen, I think there is, right? They're not admitting it. They're, behind closed doors, and even like a double set of closed doors, the leadership at WHO is probably thinking, what is going on here? Why are more countries speaking out? And I just hope that they don't bully these smaller countries into changing their positions. And something we've talked about, Brent, is I want these bigger superpowers, these bigger countries to come out and to support these smaller countries, because as much as we appreciate, Gambia, Mozambique, and Serbia, we're going to need some of the big boys to step up and to say this, because that's really what's going to drive it. And the reason why it's going to drive it is because that's where the funding comes from. It really comes back to the money. And if you have a country that is giving $200 to $300 million a year to the WHO, and they start questioning the tactics and techniques, that's how you change. Because, politicians, bureaucrats, they don't change because they want to. They change because they have to. And it's one of the reasons why we're here this week while we will be at the next COP, because we are going to force them to change. Because they're not going to sit behind a closed door and go, something, they were right. TPA was right. No, we have to force them. We have to embarrass them. We have to shame them into changing and making sure that consumers can have these options.
And then I guess, we're going to move here to our interviews shortly, but let me ask you, I mean, for those countries that feel like they're being shut out, how can they, crack through and have their voices heard? Or is their voice actually being heard? They just need to have resolve.
Well, it'd be nice if some of these countries would realise that they're not being heard, and because there were quite a number of statements who mentioned a harm reduction, and that they would like to accept some of the nicotine products, safer nicotine products, or use them in their tobacco control policies. But it'd be nice if some of them realise that they're not being listened to, and they're being basically trodden on, ridden roughshod by the FCTC, and just maybe they've raised their voices more. Talk to New Zealand. New Zealand was very robust in its response. So talk to them, get together a coalition, propose a decision, get someone to second it, and then that has to be discussed at the FCTC conference or COP conference. And that's the way to go forward. And they just need to, like you said, stand up for themselves, really.
And quite frankly, I would love to see a rogue coalition get together behind closed doors of the ones that are supporting THR. And so they can speak as one voice. Right now, they're speaking as, a dozen different voices, but I would love to see a press release or some sort of statement, unifying statement from these countries. So other countries, again, feel that they can be a part of this.
Well, if only we had some access, then our delegates, could be, nudged along that way. But we can't even talk to them because we're not really a part of it, are we?
There's the rub. There's the rub, Brent.
That is the rub. So I'm happy that you guys brought up New Zealand because we're going to listen again to the New Zealand statement that was out in the opening. And then we're going to go in to talk to Nancy Lucas, who organized Asia Day for Good Cop 2.0. And she's, of course, from New Zealand. Gentlemen, let's move on to our interviews and we'll catch you at the end of the broadcast.
Thanks, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
New Zealand has made great strides in implementing the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control and reducing smoking rates. Since 2012, the adult daily smoking rate in New Zealand has more than halved and is now 6.9%, among the lowest in the world. We are close to our goal of adult daily smoking prevalence of less than 5%. The theme of uniting for tobacco-free generation resonates strongly. We are committed to this goal and we have seen great success. Among people 14 to 24, only 3% smoke daily. And of 15 to 17-year-olds, just 0.6% smoke daily. A new generation is growing up smoke-free. Since 2019, smoking rates have declined more rapidly in association with implementation of tobacco harm reduction measures, particularly regulated access to vaping products. We apply risk proportionate regulations to vaping products to ensure that they are available to support people in quitting smoking while discouraging youth uptake. New Zealand continues to tighten regulatory controls to protect youth, including retail, product and marketing rules to strengthen reinforcement. These measures are working. 2025 data shows that vaping rates continue to fall. New Zealand remains firm committed to reducing the immense harm caused by tobacco control, utilising all three aspects of tobacco control as defined in Article 1D of the Convention: supply, demand and harm reduction strategies. We look forward to sharing our experiences and learning from others as we work together towards a world where smoking no longer claims millions of lives.
Well, Nancy, there you go. Thanks for joining us today to kickstart our Asia Day coverage. Nancy's the executive coordinator for the Coalition of Asia Pacific Tobacco Harm Reduction Advocates, CAPRA. And Nancy, good to see you again. Whoa, we lost your audio. There we go. I think we got you back. So see, there's the WHO trying to silence your voice again.
To be expected, correct? To be expected.
So, hey, let's jump into this. Were you able to hear the delegation from New Zealand, the opening statement?
Yes, I was. And I found that the latter part of that statement to be probably the best part of that statement. And what I mean is the New Zealand remains firmly committed to reducing the immense harm caused by tobacco control.
Oh, she did say that, but I thought it was a slip of the tongue.
No. I
No,
don't think
really?
because I'll read the whole statement. Okay.
Okay.
New Zealand remains firmly committed to reducing the immense harm caused by tobacco control, neutralizing all three aspects of tobacco control as defined in Article 1D of the Convention: supply, demand, and harm reduction strategies.
So it was not a slip of the tongue. Wow.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, she goes on to say, we look forward to sharing our experiences and learning from others as we work together towards a world where smoking no longer claims millions of lives.
Well, I mean, I've often said, I've said it often that, harm reduction for us means, reducing the harm caused by tobacco control.
Yeah.
It's not
Well,
just
there
the
we are.
tobacco smoke we need the harm reduction from.
I've said it too, so that made me very happy to
No,
hear that.
yeah, no doubt. Um, you know, Obviously, too, the other thing that happened was that they gave New Zealand the Dirty Ashtray Award. And I've got that actually right here. This is the little write up that they did. And New Zealand, they got the Dirty Ashtray for trying to portray their current tobacco control plan as a success, when in reality, since COP10, they've reversed world leading reforms, sabotaged indigenous tobacco free aspirations, have alarming vaping rates among young people, and have plummeted from second to 53rd in the Global Tobacco Industry Interference Index of 2025. New Zealand's legislative reversal is being used by tobacco industry interests globally to push bad policy. What do you make of
Yeah.
that?
I make of that's them getting a spanking for not following the script. The thing about the generational ban, the age, what was it, smoke-free generation ban that was repealed by the current coalition government, it was superfluous. I mean, right now, the children, the kids, the young people, okay, the smoking rate is less than 1%. It was just grandstanding, I think. Okay. And I think that the reason that New Zealand is, that they're calling them out, it's funny that the reference that they're using to call out New Zealand is their own reference, their own information. They're not actually looking at the stats. They're not actually looking at the success. But also, I mean, when I saw it, I was kind of like, but you know what? I thought about it. I'm like, look at this. New Zealand's getting an ashtray and Mexico's getting an orchid. If
Yes.
that doesn't tell you how far off track they are, I don't think anything will,
Mm. And
you
I
know?
find I find it striking that whenever they get an example of a country, an organization, a person, a group doing something that doesn't conform to their anti-nicotine attitude, they immediately blame them on big tobacco interference. But
Right.
what's the proof of that? Do they have proof that New Zealand has been influenced by the tobacco industry and that's why they're taking these actions?
I think it's their interpretation of Article 5.3. As you know, well, I think anyway, when Article 5.3 was written, and I actually had this explained to me by Robert Beaglehole, it wasn't meant to exclude, it was meant to prevent undue influence. Now, New Zealand, when they speak with industry or they speak with either independent or tobacco industry, they note it. It's in the journals and the Hansards. The WHO doesn't want anybody talking to anybody. They want them completely excluded. Okay. This is a war against anything. You're either with us or you're against us, to quote, I think that was Bush.
It was Bush.
It was Bush, yeah. So New Zealand's doing it their own way. And New Zealand has always done it their own way. They don't conform. They don't like that.
They don't conform. They don't like that. Boy, they're a real piece of work, aren't they? Let me ask you. Let me ask you about Asia. What is it that might be particular about that region? And I know it's a huge region, but what is it that might mean that there's more struggles there, say, than in North America?
Well, first of all, it's the way we approach things. Okay, in North America, it's very much about the rights of the individual. It's very much still the whole taxation without representation thing, at least in America. Whereas in Asia, it's about the collective, the greater good. Okay. You don't have people up there screaming, my rights, my rights, my rights. We have people up there going, listen, people are dying. What are we going to do about it? The operative word is we, not I.
Mm.
Okay. Now, that's the common thread throughout all of these different countries, all of these different cultures, all of these different contexts. Okay, so when we get together and we all sit down, we leave all of the things that separate us at the door and focus on the things that join us. And the thing that joins us is trying to get risk proportionate regulation and information out, and we're trying to save lives because each and every one of us have lost someone because of combustible tobacco, and some people it's the dangerous oral tobacco. This is not, it's personal. I think with a lot of Western advocates it's personal, but with us it's personal, but it's not really about us. It's about everyone else, the group, the collective, and that's the difference.
Yeah, that is a clear difference, isn't it?
Mhm.
Are countries in the region, because you're going to have a better idea than I do, though I do know that it appears that some of the countries in the region seem to be more prone to bans and restrictions on safer nicotine products. What's the scale looking like there?
It's about, I think Tiki covered it yesterday. I think it's 60-40. 60 bans, 40 not, or not properly regulated. The other thing that people need to understand is that, in our region, we have government controlled or government interests in tobacco growing, manufacturing, and distribution. And the countries with the biggest tobacco interests, let's just say tobacco interests, are the countries that have the bans on the safer products. That doesn't, you don't have to be an astrophysicist to figure out why that would be.
No doubt. Well, and we talked about this, I think, yesterday or the day before, just the irony around the fact that the biggest tobacco companies in the world are owned by some of the biggest countries in the world. And there they are at the WHO. How come Article 5.3 means that, say, China should not be allowed into the treaty?
Well, think about it this way. I mean, India has won the Orchid Award before. So has China, I believe. That tells you right there something is terribly, horribly wrong with the entire process. And that throws it into question as to the legitimacy of whether it is about public health. Because from what I'm seeing and from what a lot of people are seeing, it's not about public health.
Tell us a little bit, if you could, about how Asia Day went yesterday at Good Cop 2.0.
I think it went well, even though I looked like a Wookiee giving my speech. But the thing that's beautiful about Asia, and I'm hoping the thing that people took away from it was they saw all of us together and they saw the dynamic with all of us and how we support each other and how we work together. Because, I think that the regional model like we have in Asia Pacific, that's how we're able to get things done. And I would hope that it would inspire maybe other regions. I mean, Latin America is pretty good too, but it would inspire other regions to understand that you get more done working together than working separately or as individuals or individual organizations.
Well, that's excellent, Nancy. Well, as always, thank you for coming on, sharing your thoughts, and for all the great work that you're doing in THR.
Thank you, Brent.
Is their position based on evidence or something like morality?
I wouldn't probably say it's mortality. It's probably more ideology. Okay. And if you wanted to be polite, you would say that their position is misguided. It is evidence selective. And if you wanted to be tough, you would say it's evidence blind. So, it's sort of cherry picking the evidence to say that, oh, we need more research. There is evidence that says tobacco harm reduction is as harmful, and to the extent of saying that nicotine causes lung cancer. This is just total nonsense. It is really against all the evidence that's out there. So yeah, it's misguided, it's evidence blind, and it's ideological.
Man, that's hard to hear. And I bet you most people would expect that not to be the case when it comes to the WHO.
Exactly.
One of the things that we hear often, and when we were just in Warsaw for Global Forum on Nicotine, just this last June, it was an interview with a South African rep from THR rep. And she spoke about how the tobacco control people in South Africa are reacting to tobacco harm reduction with the concept that harm is harm. And it's just as simple as that. What does that mean? And is there danger in that approach?
I think the sort of the message that I'm hearing is the fact that the people who say harm is harm are totally ignoring what I would sort of say is the concept of relative harm, relative risk. And it's always this conflating of the argument about the fact that nicotine does have harmful effects, okay? But it's significantly, by 2 orders of magnitude, less harmful than smoking cigarettes. Okay, so when you say harm is harm, you're equating nicotine basically with cigarette smoking, which once again is really flies completely in the face of all the evidence. So, and it translates to the sort of the fact that a lot of the regulations around these products are not proportionate to the risk that these products pose to human health. I mean, I'm not denying that nicotine is totally harmless. It is not, okay? But compared to cigarette smoking, it's 2 orders of magnitude less harmful. So harm is harm, but yeah, it's got to be seen in the proper balance.
Well, it's such an absolute position.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the problem is the perception, okay? Because there are many, many people who will continue to send the message, for example, that nicotine causes lung cancer, okay? And nobody denies the fact that nicotine is an addiction. But in the same way, it's a psychoactive substance. In the same way, I would like people to think of it in the same way that you look at alcohol, the same way you look at coffee. These are substances which are psychoactive. It makes you feel good. It reduces stress. It relaxes you. Okay. So to me, it's not an absolute argument. It's seeing it in the right perspective that yes, alcohol is not completely harmless in excess. It's the same with nicotine, and it's the same with caffeine. I guess if you take, 20 cups of coffee a day, it definitely would have some health impacts. So I don't think it's an absolute. It's really a relative. It's a spectrum, I guess.
Well, joining us today live from Geneva is the man himself, Dr. Tiki Pang. Dr. Pang, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you, Brent.
So, of course, we just listened to a clip from your interview that we did about a month ago. You mentioned the WHO is driven by ideology and that they are evidence blind. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think, the WHO position has to be seen in the sort of the context of why they arrive at this point. And I always say it's related to two main factors. One is sort of a legacy of bad behavior on the part of the big tobacco companies that they actively tried to sort of sabotage the development of the Framework Convention on tobacco control. So as a result of that, a lot of the research, a lot of the evidence that is actually generated by some very good research done in PMI, in BAT, and many of the other multinational tobacco gets ignored simply because it came from an industry source. So that's what I mean by evidence blind. That's what I mean by cherry picking the evidence. And that's extended to other kinds of research which they perceive to be supported by the tobacco industry. Now, they don't apply that to research supported by the pharmaceutical industry, for example. So that's a real anachronism in my view. So that's one, the legacy of bad history. The second one is, of course, the most important one perhaps, the funding, the money. As we all know, Bloomberg, for example, supports the TFI, the Tobacco Free Initiative within WHO. And during the present funding crisis that's affecting WHO, the pullout by the United States, which provides something like 23% of the funding of the WHO. So that funding issue is another reason why they choose to perhaps sideline or ignore the evidence that THR has value and can benefit and can be very important public health tool. So those are just my views, and it's unfortunately very deeply entrenched within the organization.
Well, now your views have some weight for some of in our audience that might not know your backstory, but you're quite familiar with the WHO and FCTC.
Right. I mean, I was at the WHO for 13 years, exactly at the same time as Derek Yach was absolutely instrumental in developing the convention. I was in another part of the WHO, not directly involved, but very aware of how everything was evolving. And, just to add to the backdrop of this, Robert Bigelhole and Ruth Bonita, they were both WHO directors at the same time as I was there. So the fact that the four of us, and there are many others, former WHO staff, that we have chosen to sort of support, quite strongly the concept of harm reduction. My question is, we can't all be wrong, okay? And that I take comfort in that. In addition, of course, the fact that during this TPA meeting, I'm seeing that it's not just former WHO officials. It's people like David Williams. He tells me he's a banker, okay? People with so many other different backgrounds, journalists, consumer activists. Are we all wrong in supporting this? So I take comfort. And this is my first time joining a TPA meeting, and it's just wonderful.
Well, that's a good segue to my next question, which is what do you think about Good Cop 2.0? And I think more importantly is, can anybody change the WHO?
Yes, I think Good Cop 2.0 is an amazing counterweight simply because of the diversity of the people who are involved in it, the countries, the consumer activists, the other kind of organizations that are involved in promoting the cause. And I think in terms of changing the WHO position, I think collectively, once again, unfortunately, it's really about TPA and the collective is the word that Nancy likes to use, actually being able to put pressure on our governments to eventually change the position of the WHO. And I think Nancy's already alluded to this. And it's correct that individual countries, especially small countries, you talk about Gambia, you talk about St. Kitts, you talk about Guyana, for example. Yes, individually they have a voice, but if they can collectively form a global coalition, for example, through the CARICOM, the Association of Caribbean Nations, through the African Union, or through ASEAN in Southeast Asia, to sort of a group of countries would carry a lot more weight. Of course, in addition to the big, powerful countries, such as the UK and Japan. And once again, money talks. These are countries that support a lot of the WHO budget. So that's the way I see it. TPA is fantastic, but at the end of the day, within COP, within the governance structure of WHO, it's the countries that really can change. There's only one thing that moves the WHO, and that is if a Minister of Health calls the Director General and say, we want you to be more open. Nobody else, okay? Not Nobel Prize winners, not all the best academics in the world, not consumer associations. And I just wanted to add to what was mentioned just earlier before. The diversity within Asia, okay? That's both great, but also a bit of a disadvantage. So many different countries, so many different cultures. Whereas in fact, in my backdrop to my experience in WHO, Latin America is much better because if you compare the two regions, Latin America, except for Brazil, is Spanish speaking, almost 95% Catholic. Okay, so culturally they are much more homogeneous. That's not the same in Asia. Okay, so we have a different challenge, but we can probably learn from our friends in Latin America.
Well, that's excellent. Well, Dr. Pang, thanks so much for bringing your perspective to our broadcast today, and good luck.
Good. Nice to
just beggars belief, really, that this is a group charged with a really important role. WHO, there's no bigger entity in the land in terms of health. They've done an awful lot of great work over the years, but for some reason, they've gone very, very bad on safer nicotine products. And to talk about nicotine and create a scaremongering narrative is kind of akin to me to kind of reefer madness. Remember the reefer madness ads with cannabis? It's a similar kind of madness that we're dealing with here. It's based on no science whatsoever. It's just scaremongering. And it's designed once again, it's another way, another tool to frighten smokers away from safer nicotine products. And they should all be ashamed of themselves. We talk about war crimes. Well, this is a crime on smokers, as far as I'm concerned. It's a disgrace, absolute disgrace. Again, I go back to my point about nicotine. What does nicotine actually do to people? Very, very little. The harms, and of course, what I know about nicotine, and I get these reports back from people who have used pouches that are not used to using pouches is, some of the pouches, probably have too much nicotine in them. And what can that do? I don't think there are many long-term effects, but it can make you dizzy and it can make you sick. And that's mainly because the person A isn't used to taking them and probably the concentration of nicotine. But beyond that, and certainly in the concentrations used in safer nicotine products, nicotine is pretty harmless.
Pretty harmless. Well, we're going to talk about that here right now. So joining us today from India, but in Geneva, is Dr. Rohan Sakera. He's a distinguished cardio-metabolic physician from Mumbai with an extensive career spanning over 20 years. Rohan, it's great to see you again.
Good to see you again, Brent.
So you specialize in non-invasive cardiology, diabetes, endocrinology, and obesity management. Now that sounds like you've dealt a lot with smoking-related illness. Do tell.
Right. So if there's one category of diseases or a group of diseases which has been directly affected by tobacco in whether it's a direct or indirect way, and that's this group of diseases. We have people with heart issues, we have people with diabetes, we have people with respiratory problems, and also obesity. Many of these patients have at some point or the other visited a doctor for tobacco-related problems if they have been using tobacco at any point of time. And this group of diseases has now been classified as a new category called lifestyle metabolic diseases, where lifestyle choices and metabolic disorders in your body have led you to have heart problems, sugar problems, cholesterol problems, and all the other associated problems with metabolism and lifestyle. So yes, tobacco has been one of the most important causative factors for these issues.
So in your opinion, are safer nicotine products then, such as nicotine vapes and pouches, safe and effective tools for smoking cessation?
Right. I mean, just a casual Cochrane search or any search of an index, PubMed or something like that will pull up data all over the place and tell you that nicotine has never been associated directly with any of these conditions. There's people out there who's ranting and raving that nicotine causes cancer, that nicotine causes all these problems, but there has been no direct causative analysis that nicotine has been shown to have a direct association with these conditions. Yes, I do agree. Nicotine, like Tiki mentioned before, that nicotine, like caffeine or theobromine in chocolate, is a stimulant. It's a psychoactive stimulant. in doses excess of what you're supposed to take, it can cause your heart rate to go up. It can cause some amount of vasodilation. It can cause a few other minor issues here and there, but it's never been shown to have a direct relationship. So when you take the risk out of a tobacco product, you're basically just giving a person the nicotine without the side effects. So that kind of makes a lot of sense to any doctor. I mean, it's harm reduction. You know, when you
Yeah.
take when you take a product which is safer than what it was before, that's harm reduction.
So I had AI scan every single document that the FCTC put out for COP11, looking for anywhere that they could explain what the harms are from nicotine use. And there's nothing. So they refuse to explain that there's harms. They just say it's addictive, and that's it. That's the whole harm, is that it's addictive. Is that enough?
The problem is that they cannot find harm anywhere is because it doesn't exist. I mean, you can't search for something that doesn't exist. I mean, there is harm with everything. Most of these reasons why many of the countries have banned these products, the harm-reduced products, is based on certain studies. Now, I know in Asia, 3 or 4 countries have based the entire reason why they banned these products based on some obscure clinical research. Now, I can just cite you one of the clinical researchers which they used as part of their ban strategy. There was this study which was done on mice, and these mice were subjected to 50 and 100 times the amount of vape aerosol. And, you know, that's really ridiculous because nobody's going to be vaping that much. If you look at it from a medical point of view, any product, when you give it above and beyond there's a certain level called the toxic level. When you give it above and beyond toxic levels, it's going to cause problems. Interestingly, a product as innocuous as water, what we drink every day. If I drink 10 liters of water, which is exactly what these trials did by subjecting these mice to insane amounts of vapor, if I give somebody to drink 10 liters of water, he's going to have a condition called water toxicity. He's going to have swelling in the brain. Your kidneys are going to fail because they're not going to be able to filter that much water. Your sodium levels are going to drop. You can even die from water intoxication. So basing a ban on a biased medical research is the most crazy thing anyone would think. It doesn't fit in the logic of science.
No, so let me ask you then. I mean, WHO and FCTC, I mean, they're out there pushing this information or misinformation. So, I mean, have they lost their credibility on this issue?
Brent, they lost their credibility with the way they handled COVID in the first place. That was a complete fiasco. They do not know how to handle these situations. They could have prevented thousands and thousands of deaths, if not millions, during COVID, if they had just taken the bold decision to go ahead with a lockdown and advise, but they just dilly-dallied, and people paid the price for that. It's out there in the open. It's not something which is a secret. I'm not giving you a state secret. When it comes to THR, we are having people, for example, if you look at, where I come from, India, 1.35 million people are dying every year. 1.35 million people are dying every year because of tobacco-related diseases. If you just go and do a computational analysis and include THR into a policy, India, for example, has a potential to save about 20 million lives in the next 30 to 40 years. That is a large amount of people you can save. Maybe the figures may be up or down, but you have a potential to save lives. You have a safe product. And it is certain vested interest, which I'm not able to understand, that is preventing them to see it from the point of view of a patient or maybe somebody who requires a harm-reduced product.
Well, it can be depressing sometimes, Rohan.
Which you do, and that's the real problem over here, because they have their own agenda. I don't know what it is, but the FCTC has completely failed the tobacco usage people all over the world. The FCTC and the WHO has failed to meet the expectation of 1.6 billion tobacco users all over the world.
Well, Rohan, thanks so much for joining us today on the broadcast, and have a good, safe time there in Geneva.
Thank you so much, Brent. Lovely.
If you had the chance to send a message to the delegates going to COP11, what would that be?
The endeavor that kills people is still called smoking. And if they're really serious about meeting the, the smoke-free targets that they always talk about, maybe they should look no further than countries such as Sweden, countries such as Norway, countries such as New Zealand. All these countries have reached smoking a smoke-free prevalence that's less than 5%. And they've got it because they've gone large on safer nicotine products. You cannot argue with the facts. There is less strokes, there are less cancers, less lung diseases in these countries as a result of what they've done. They are a shining example of what happens when you don't scaremonger, when you support smokers, when you don't get caught up in a scaremongering operation with children and nicotine in the developing brain. This is what you get. You get smoke-free status, and this is absolutely. They should be they should be the centerpiece of COP. These countries, and they won't be. They won't be. What they'll talk about is they'll probably tell lies about how great Australia model is, the pharmacy model, the prescription model, call it what you will, which has been a complete and utter disaster. And I don't know why we allow people to do this, but there doesn't seem to be any mechanism, a right reply, a rebuttal of what these people are doing. They don't tend to invite people who have an alternative point of view, and there are some. I mean, we know through GFN, some of the greatest minds in the world, some of the greatest researchers in the world have done incredible, incredible work, and yet none of that will get an airing in COP.
And joining us now, also from Geneva, is Professor Dr. Sharifa Wampute. She's a medical physician and a professor of public health in Malaysia. It's great to see you again, Dr. Sharifa.
Yeah, nice to meet you again, Ben.
So when we last spoke in person at the Global Forum on Nicotine in Warsaw, you mentioned that most countries who have signed the FCTC treaty consider vaping the same as smoking. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, it's quite a sad story, Bren. Tobacco is considered, of course, it's a dangerous, addictive problem. But unfortunately, all the other nicotine or anything that contains nicotine products are deemed as tobacco. Hence, if you go online and you look at, whether nicotine contributes to NCDs, I was talking about this concept yesterday. What happens is that all the connotations from tobacco will also comes up. So in a way, it has been simulated as something which is equal, even though in the sense of risk, when you talk about tobacco and pure nicotine, it is totally different spectrum. So I think there's an error in that, but unfortunately, this is some of the terms that has been used in many organizations such as WHO and so on. And hence, many of the countries adhere to this rule, meaning that any nicotine is considered a tobacco. So if you're a smoker and you want to quit smoking and you go to the airport, you don't have a place to go because you can only go to a smoking room where you'll be vaping or you use heated not burn product to reduce your risk, but you'll be mingling with all the smokers as well. So it translates into practicality as well. Yeah.
I know that experience well. Let me ask you, is Malaysia a signatory to the FCTC treaty?
Oh yes, many of the Asian countries are signatories to the FCTCs. It was signed in 2005 and ratified in 2006, and we have legal obligations. Many of the countries that have signed have legal obligations to adhere to whatever FCTCs has in mind, including putting up a no smoking sign, banning smoking, and so forth and so forth. So there's a certain what we say as KPI, key performance indicators that every country should come back to FCTCs and report on that. I would like to take note that one of the countries that do not actually sign to FCTCs is Indonesia for Asian countries. And even China, one of the biggest producers of tobacco as well, are actually signatories to the FCTCs. which is very interesting.
Yeah, that it is. It seems a bit strange. I would think that under 5.3 there would be some kind of conflict. Let me ask you this. There's been a lot of discussion this week about countries not being heard. Those countries that are signers of the treaty, who are trying to get the opinion out that tobacco harm reduction should be something that the WHO cares about. And there's been a lot of derogatory kind of feelings, being pushback from WHO, or at least the NGOs that they're working with. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it's sad, Brent, because not only is the users verified, and most of the users of tobacco, hence nicotine, are mostly the one that is mostly compromised, meaning that they are the underpaid, they are the one who has the highest stress, the highest mental health risk, the underserved, the low income, and even the low educated sort of population. So they are the one that are mostly users of this nicotine and also tobacco. So there's a trend changing where people are using less tobacco. Some countries, including in Malaysia, we are using less tobacco. In a way, the tobacco control is working, but there's increment of users of less harmful products like vaping, heated tobacco products, and so forth. So what happens that if you minimize the impact of tobacco harm reduction in these countries, what will happen? Most of them will be, demoralized. What will happen is also there will be an influx of illicit market, and some of the users will actually transition back to tobacco. So this is something that we do not want, Brent. But since there is no clear-cut, pathway in that sense, where are we going? Most of these people who actually wants to transition into reduced risk products do not have the facility to go to. And when that happens, they either use black market, devices, or they just go back into tobacco. So this is something really harmful, and we want to make sure that, if possible, that all the population that are able to quit would do it safely, not only using the traditional, so-called the traditional NRT, and I'm not opposing that. If the traditional NRT works for you, well and good. But unfortunately, we have seen that the NRT percentage of success in the long term is not very high. That's the problem. This is why some of the users or consumers are more comfortable using the reduced risk products such as vape or heated tobacco products and so forth. So this is something that I worry too, especially for the next generation. And this is not a blanket rule, Brent. Please take this. I'm not saying this lightly. I don't want a new generation who are nicotine addicted. This is not what we are saying. Most of the experts would say that if you are able to stop on your own using cold turkey, or even stop smoking on your own, yeah, well and good. But especially for certain communities or population who are not able to stop smoking using the traditional so-called NRT or whatever methods, then there is another option that they should go to, which are the reduced risk products.
Well,
Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does make sense, Dr. Sharifa. And you know what? You're consistent.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and have a good rest of the conference, and we'll get back in a moment to our closing. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent.
And the Conference of the People, gentlemen. So tell us about day 4.
Yeah, day 4. Again, some really interesting panels. We have Jeannie Cameron, right, talking about the plenary opening statements. We've talked a little bit about some of the delegations, but I think that's going to be helpful for folks to get really a comprehensive look at what's happening. And we're going to talk about the Bloomberg in the room, and Michael Bloomberg. There's going to be a panel talking about his influence, and obviously something we've covered, but I think it's important really to dive down and to look at just the influence that he's had on this, and it all comes down to money and paying off Ash, all these organizations, and obviously that money filters to the delegations in one way or another.
Martin?
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to Jeannie Cameron's session, which is at 10 o'clock. She, as I said to delegates here, she went through 104 statements and she watched them all, so we don't have to. And she's going to be reporting on what was interesting in those statements, some highlights and maybe some lowlights too. So I'm very much looking forward to seeing what she said.
Well, that's excellent. I know you guys they're all waiting for you there right now. So why don't I just leave you and have a good day.
Thank you, Brent.
Thanks,
Really
Mark.
appreciate it.
Well, and that is it for this special edition of RegWatch Live. Before you head off, please hit subscribe down below on YouTube, like us on Facebook, and don't forget to follow us on X. For RegulatorWatch.com, I'm Brent Stafford.